He'd be glad to be remembered that he made a huge effort with his life to live it. You know, he really did. I felt that he is remembered in a way that he would like to be. His humour, his business, his projects. When he first died, I kept thinking about all the awful things, you know, some of these dreams and stuff like that. But I have noticed over time, there's actually nicer memories coming back now. And he had a tumour in his tongue. Well, it was actually in the back of his neck, but it made his tongue, swell up, basically. So his voice was very different at the end. Sort of, he was just lisping a bit, really. And in the early weeks, I couldn't get his voice, which I found really difficult to deal with, you know. Been married for 30 years and I can't hear your voice. So in the end, I kept ringing the answer phone. And actually it was and I got little bits of, when we weren't kind of mad phone people, you know, I've got little clips of him, sort of when we were lambing and things. So I've got his voice back now. Yeah. He was extremely intelligent, almost kind of really, really clever, too clever by half. But very witty, very good fun, always busy, had loads of things on the go. If we'd been up at the farm, I could have showed you, I'm drowning in fruit, pears, apples, whatever. He was a real sort of enthusiast. When he did something, he did it incredibly enthusiastically, and he started making pickles and jams and, you know, all the sort of stuff I can't do. I'm not that, it's like science cooking, I can't do it. He was absolutely lovely. And when we got engaged years ago, a friend of mine said to me, "Oh, he's not very handsome." And I said, "Well, beauty's in the eye of the beholder." And she said, "But the main thing is, does he make you laugh 5 times a day?" And he did. He was diagnosed with prostate cancer and bladder cancer 10 years ago. I think I told you a friend stopped me in the street and said, "Oh, you were so lucky you had John for 10 years. But it didn't feel like that. It was 10 years where, of course, the time went by and we weren't perpetually worried, but we did get worried. And then I suppose it was July 22, his PSA levels had gone sort of through the roof, really. And I think he knew that, you know, he was sort of time limited. And he had 6 months of chemotherapy, but that really knocked him about, and he regretted having it in the end. And even though he did sort an awful lot out, there's still, I just can't believe how much you're expected to do when you're in a state of grief. Amazes me. He started to really go downhill, I suppose, Christmas time, and then he spent all of April at St Michael's Hospice. And the whole time I stayed there with him, the whole time we were there, it was a manic time because I had to drive home and do the farm and things in the day, come back in the evening to be with him overnight. And they were wonderful there, but he just wanted to get home, and he kept saying it, and he kept saying it, and he kept saying it, and I kept saying, "I'm going to do everything I can, I'm going to do everything I can." And in the end we hired a private nurse, which was going to cost a fortune, but actually he came home on a Friday and then died on the Sunday. But he got home. The nights were a bit riotous because he had these crazy dreams, which I think when they call it when the cancer sort of goes onto the brain a bit, he'd got a huge tumour in his neck, and I think it was a combo of that and the drugs, I think. He had these incredible dreams, and he'd quite often wake me up and tell me, and they were really quite adventurous dreams, sometimes not nice. One horrible dream, I remember, I woke up and he'd just got tears rolling down his face. And he dreamt that Hereford Hospital had written to him and said he was getting better. And I can really understand why you would have that sort of a dream, you know. That was one of the most upsetting nights for me. Another was when we had to go to casualty because he needed to be catheterised and they couldn't do it. So he went to A&E and we had to sit in plastic chairs, bearing in mind it had spread to his bones and everything. He was desperately uncomfortable. and we sat there all night. That was pretty miserable. He said, I don't want to end up in a hospice with tubes coming in and out, and that's exactly what happened. And I can't say I've got guilt about it, but I don't know, the day the nurse suggested, the palliative care nurse suggested that he needed to go to the hospice, I felt like I was letting him down, you know, and when the ambulance came. That was the worst day, actually. I think it was worse than the day he died. Yeah, because I felt like I couldn't protest because I knew it was the right thing. He'd lost most of his mobility and I was having a hell of a struggle, you know, getting him comfortable and getting him to the loo. And in March this year, John died in May. Our neighbour, who was a farmer, he was only 61, I think, had a heart attack in his field. He was lambing, and just Sunday morning he went out, had a heart attack. And I saw the air ambulance coming and I thought, there's another family further up. You probably went up there actually when you were, and this lady's mum is 103, and I thought, well, it's probably for her, you know, and then I found out it was for our neighbour. And I don't know his wife particularly well, but I think about her because she's just in that bungalow that you might or might not have passed. And I think what's worse, actually, you know, spending all, you know, the best part of a year kind of, well, nursing somebody, or for it to be like that. And I decided, actually, for the person who's dying, like that is best. But for me, even though a lot of it was so awful, it meant I think I was preparing all the time. That's not to say when it happened, it felt like a huge thing, but I think it must have helped for me. Well, in a way, I suppose you start your grieving. And so I think about Angela and I think, I think out of the two of us, I'm the one who's better off if this has to happen, you know. If you could say it, I had quite good COVID because I was with John continuously and we did this lambing together, and we had done it previously in the past, but I was home solid, you know. I wasn't having to chase off and go and open up, and, you know. So I sort of see that as, that was the 2 years before the year that he got sick. I feel very grateful for that. And as I say, we've got 20 acres we could roam around. I find things like eating on my own really miserable. You know, sometimes I get to 6 o'clock and I think, oh, toast. Toast will cover it, you know. And I keep telling myself I've got to get to grips with that. But yeah, he was such an enthusiastic foodie, you know. Every meal I made was the best meal he'd ever eaten. Oh, sorry, yeah, you know what I mean? And it was just so fulfilling to, you know, I did always cook. He made the jam and the pickles and I did the, you know, the domestic cooking. So yeah, eating's been, and I've noticed a couple of friends that I've made here who've lost their husbands say the same, actually. And I hadn't made a decision to retire, but it's just the way it worked out. And then John went, I think, well, what is my purpose here? I've got a lot of animals, so that's one of my purposes, to get up and get them out in the pouring rain and stuff. When we first moved up into the small holding, for a wedding anniversary, John planted a rose bush. Well, for us, you know. And so he died on the Sunday morning, and I was waiting for the undertaker, and I just went and cut a rose, and I put it in a vase, and I put it on a little table by where he was laying. And I've done it every Sunday since. And roses have done, some things have done very badly because of the weird summer, but apparently roses have done really well, and particularly this bush has done amazingly well. It's still in flower now. And I thought, oh, well, it'll probably keep going, you know, for sort of certainly 6 weeks or something. But in fact, it's 4 months now, and I'm still getting a bloom off it every Sunday. I'm putting it in a room actually that we don't actually and didn't use very much, but I had to, because it was downstairs, I had set up as a bedroom for him coming home. But I still like the idea of it being in there, even though I'm not seeing it much because I'm not often in there. But what has amazed me is how it's not talked about. And I think I said to you on the phone, it's a bit like childbirth. People don't talk about it, about when you're caring for somebody who's dying. It's, I guess it's a pretty miserable thing to talk about. And would I have coped a bit better if I'd been a bit more clued up as to what could happen, you know? Yeah, some preparation would have been nice, which is why it is exciting to think that you are putting it out there, you know, and that it is getting discussed a bit. John kept asking the palliative team that were coming into the house, he kept saying, how do I get from here to death? And I was curious too. I suppose I could have worked it out. He just got sicker and sicker and sicker, but everyone's experience is very different. As a lady that I talked to here, her husband was only ill for 2 weeks. But I didn't know John would lose all his mobility. And although he'd lost 2 or 3 stone, he was a weight and it was physically very demanding. It would have been useful to know that, actually. Things like that it could have been. And also doing personal care for your husband. I think for me, a bit more openness about the path we could have been treading would have been helpful. When he came home on the Friday, I was hoping maybe he'd have a few weeks at home, you know, and whatever. But I think on the last conversation I had with him was on Saturday afternoon. And then he went into a sleep that I could tell was sort of not him having one of his kind of druggy naps, you know. It was very deep, and his breathing was very, very sort of noisy and deep-seated and whatever. And I do remember I was sobbing my heart out on Saturday night, and I said to him, you can go, just go if you want to. And then on Sunday morning, I got a sense that he probably wasn't going to wake up again. But I wasn't sure. But I did have this feeling. But I didn't realise it until afterwards. Which sounds a bit odd, I know, but on the Saturday I thought, I think he is going, and I'll tell him to go, you know, if he wants to. But I didn't remember until a couple of days afterwards that I'd even done that on the Saturday night. But actually, the death itself was quite, sounds odd, but for something so horrible, it was actually quite lovely. It was a glorious day. The dogs had both been in and jumped on him. His working dog, his colleague, had licked his face. Quite often when I'd say to him, what's the time? If it was 10 to 10, he'd say, oh, it's cowboy time. 10 to 10. And he died at 10 to 10. And he looked absolutely, I mean, the colour went very, very quickly. That surprised me. And then the nurse who was there put a rolled towel under his chin to close his mouth, and I closed his eyes. But yeah, he looked peaceful. That's what they say, isn't it? He looked incredibly peaceful, and he looked quite tortured for quite a long time, so it was quite lovely in some ways. Could have done with another 20 years, but hey.